what I believe is common sense, I'm learning it's not that common. In every political campaign, you have the issues and you have the candidate. And that's primarily what the public sees and what they hear. But there's a lot more influences in a campaign, and there's a lot more influences in the outcome. You also have the political strategists and the political consultants that are behind the scenes. For me, that role is filled by one man. His name is Ben Davis. Ben is truly one of the most remarkable people I've ever known. He's smart, he's principled, he's also incredibly intense, and his style has made him a hero to some and a villain to others. Ben gets calls from all across the country to work in campaigns, but was most recently the face and the chief strategist for the Vote No campaign for a school bond in Kansas's largest school district, a district that has great needs. We talk about that bond, why and how he got involved, and we talk about the current political landscape and what he sees as the future for the conservative movement and the Republican Party. I hope you enjoy my conversation with my friend, political strategist, and consultant, Ben Davis. Ben Davis.
Yep.
There are some that think you're a hero today. There are some that think you're a villain today. We're going to talk about, you were the face and the chief strategist for the Vote No campaign for Wichita's school bond.
Yep.
We're going to talk about it, man.
Great.
How do you feel today, though? I mean, this is a day, we're filming this right after the election.
Yep.
Like, you feel pretty good about yourself.
I feel great about it. I think it was a solid win. Look, the odds were stacked against the No campaign from the very beginning. Just to be totally frank, the school district should have won that election. They should have won the election. They had public opinion on their side. I have polling data that shows they had public opinion on their side. They had just the monstrosity that is the Wichita school, 259 as a district. They had the teachers union. They had a built-in voting block. They had 88 or whatever schools with parents and kids and community members that they instantly could have gotten their message out to. They should have won that election. And I went into Election Day thinking that they probably were going to win that election. But at the end of the day, they just did not run a good campaign. And I'd be happy to tell them that to their face and, let them know all the mistakes that they made. They didn't run a good campaign. And that's what happens when you hire a marketing firm instead of real political professionals who know what they're doing to do it.
Well, we'll talk about it. I do want to talk about that. It's interesting, as you know, obviously you as a friend of mine, and then on the other side on the Vote Yes piece, I have a lot of friends over there too.
Yep.
So I've heard from both sides in this discussion. It's been interesting to listen to both sides and how they interpret these things. We'll talk about that school bond, but I think it's important kind of have an understanding just from a conversation, like politically, like where did you come from? Like where did this... People know Ben from variety of different things, from the insurance world and some of the things you were doing there. Mm-hmm. You had a radio show at one point in time. There's all kinds. You've done a lot of different things in your young life. So, like, how did you get to this point to where now, as a political strategist and consultant, walk me back for a couple minutes?
Well, I'm from Wichita originally. Went to 259 schools. Graduated from North High School in class of 02, and I have been a political and a news junkie since I was born. My dad listened to Rush Limbaugh. I was a Rush baby. Mm-hmm. He worked for the Wichita City Fire Department, and I remember he would sometimes pick me up from school, and Rush would be going, and I loved it. I ate it up. Thought it was the best thing in the world. And so ever since I can remember, I've liked the news, I've liked politics, and I've been highly opinionated. And as anybody who knows me, I'm just a highly strung individual.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah, and so I loved it. I loved it in high school. I went on to Kansas State and got very politically active there almost since day one. Started volunteering on local campaigns, and I've always loved underdog stories. I've always loved fighting. Not necessarily fist fighting, but like I love being in the fight. I've loved being in a debate, competing, absolutely. And I've loved, coming from behind and being able to win and showing people, honestly what conservatism means, what it can do, and that it can win in an arena of ideas, in employing good strategies and all that, and having good arguments. And I've loved every bit of it. And so from there, it just kind of launched me in college and then afterward, and started getting very politically involved. And politics is just one of these weird things where you don't need a degree in it. I mean, you just got to have an interest and a love for it, and a certain, thickness of skin, a little bit of, kind of being maniacal. And then you start volunteering. It pays nothing. You're not going to get rich. You're going to be very well hated by a lot of people. But if you love it, then it's an easy thing to fall into and then to stay into. And it's also easy to get really burned out by. Yeah. And I experienced that too.
Well, who have you worked for? When did you start? How old were you when you first started working, your first major campaign? And I know this story, but I want the public to understand you a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I remember being somewhat politically active just even as a kid. I mean, anybody around Wichita, especially pro-life, not pro-life, remembers Summer of Mercy, all of that. I remember, being a part of that to some degree, my parents and all of that. And that made a huge impression on me. I remember my dad, like I said, was a fireman, was kind of on both sides in terms of...
Was he a labor guy? Was he a union guy?
He was not a member of the union. He did not like the union, and he actually was one of the people who gave a very deep suspicion in me of organized labor.
And that continues to this day. Right?
Absolutely continues to this day.
You and I have had chats. I mean, this is totally off topic, but you and I have had talks about how the Republican Party and the relationship with collective bargaining, labor unions, and these things and these topics, that the Republican Party could probably do a better job in this space with mending and these relationships and navigating these relationships.
They could, and I know we'll get into this. Look, what I appreciate about where the Republican Party is now is that it's not the party of the country club. I don't really think it ever was. I think there was always strong elements, especially with Reagan and other things, that were very much about working people. But it had a messaging problem, a marketing problem. And it seemed as like just kind of the blue blood country club thing, even though I don't think that was reality. That's most certainly not the case now. And I'm glad to see that the Republican Party is being known more for helping working class people. Yeah. Because I think the ideas have always been there, even though, they were demonized. I still have a very deep suspicion of organized labor. And not all of it's bad or whatever, and I certainly have things to learn, but it'll be very interesting to see going forward for the party if we're able to be, I guess, common bedfellows between our principles and organized labor, if that's a relationship that's going to work or not. And I know we can get into more of that, but no, he very much he did not like the union, and primarily because. And it wasn't like a practical thing for the union that they weren't trying to, maybe help them with wages or get a better contract. Maybe that was part of it. He didn't like the fact that the union leadership went against what he thought was the majority of the union, and they constantly supported Democrats. He did not like that. He was very suspicious. I mean, I'll just say this. Look, my grandparents on my dad's side were farmers, but they were ardent anti-New Dealers. They did not like Roosevelt's New Deal. And it was a very deeply bred thing into my family that you do not trust people on the left. Wow. It's part of family history.
So you come by it naturally, don't you?
Come by very naturally. It's marrow deep, honestly. And that we did not like the New Deal. We do not like big government. We do not like higher taxes. And that the notion that the government is going to come in and solve a problem for you, and that they're going to fix something, that the government is where we're going to get, culture and the best ideas and the vision and all of this, that is a false way of thinking, and that way of thinking is a cul-de-sac, essentially. That it's a complete dead end. It will lead to nowhere, except for ultimately, if it grows too large, it'll lead to tyranny. I mean, that was my grandparents, who were educated 4th and 8th grade. They understood that, and they understood what they did not like, and that big government was the problem.
Tell me about the people you've worked for, politically. I mean, you've got a litany in your young career, and you took a break, and we'll talk about that and why you took a break and how you got back involved in this political world. But who are the people you've worked for?
Well, I've worked for a lot of folks, but I'll give a couple bigger names. Chris Kobach is one of the bigger ones, and another person who I think is wildly misunderstood.
And you are very loyal to Chris Kobach.
I am very loyal to Chris
person,
Kobach.
As a man, you're very loyal to him.
I'm very loyal to him. Chris is fundamentally a good man. He's a good husband. He's a good father. He treats his family very, very well. He is wickedly smart. He's one of the best educated people maybe in the world. I mean, he graduated the top of his class from the best universities that the world has to offer, but he's incredibly humble about all of that. He does not wear that stuff out. I mean, you really have to kind of pry it out of him to even talk about it. He's a normal guy. He's a person full of character, and like me and others, I mean, he's a fighter at the end of the day. He has serious convictions and serious beliefs. And, obviously he wants to win an election, but he is willing to lose an election to not compromise on his beliefs. And you can disagree with those beliefs. You can say all kinds of things about him, but you're not going to say he's a person who doesn't have integrity and character, and you can't see that he doesn't fight and stand up for the things that he believes in. I mean, he is a true, not just intellectual, but what you would call a movement conservative, a grassroots movement conservative. And those are the people I love. Those are the people that make this movement
That butters your bread.
Absolutely.
Like we talk. But after you ran his campaign in 2012, correct? Secretary of State campaign?
2010.
2010. He wins.
He wins.
You run it. How old are you when you run that campaign? Statewide campaign, how old were you?
24, something like that.
24 years old. You're running a statewide campaign, a victorious campaign, and then you're like, I'm out, man. I cannot do this. Why? What happened that said I can't do this anymore?
Massive burnout. It was massive burnout. Look, I mean, anybody who works in politics will know that even the people on your own side can be more vicious than the people on the opposite side. And I just dealt with a lot of crap, honestly. And being so young and everything else, I mean, it was a lot to deal with. We went hard for 2 years. I'd worked on other campaigns before that, during that time. Did some even after that. I mean, not as much, but did some after. Was offered a job to go work for the RNC. Thought about joining Paul Ryan's campaign when he was going to ramp up for president for 2012. All this, but I was so burnt out, and I thought, if I stay in this right now, just as I'm not in a good place, that this is not going to be good for my soul. So I decided I didn't completely get out of it, but I definitely took a major step back, came back,
yeah.
And then ended up working for Senator Moran. He was newly minted senator at that time, and ended up with his local office down here in Wichita, really just to take a break, take a breather, and then ended up meeting a girl named Lauren, who's now my wife, thinking, okay, I'm out of here in a year. Well, we ended up getting married and staying. She thought the same thing. She was going to be out of here in a year and staying, and so still followed politics a lot, but took a major step.
You were in private business.
In private business.
We didn't grow up together. We didn't know each other really. We've known each other just for a couple of years. Somehow, some way, I got connected to you on Facebook, and I saw something, because you also have a theological background, and I saw something that you posted, Two Kingdoms philosophy, and it was something I was actually teaching on when I was in pastoral ministry at the time. I was teaching on the same concept, and I remember I read this, and I was like, this is unique, this is interesting. I want to pick his brain. And I reached out to you on Messenger. I said, hey man, you want to grab a cup of coffee? So we go grab a cup of coffee. We were talking about this Two Kingdoms, and then I let you know, hey, I might actually be running for office. I might be running for county commission. And one thing led to another, and before long, like literally, you're ingrained in my campaign, and I hire you to run my campaign. So what was it that finally said, okay, I'm green light again, I'm back in the political fray, I want to get involved again? Like what took you from that to, how did I convince you to get back into the political fray in the campaign world?
Now, do you want to go on record saying that you pulled me back in? Because this could be,
detrimental to my political
absolutely,
career? Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. So, I think I just fell in love with the whole experience again. I loved campaigning. I love campaigning. I love a fight. Your campaign was a fight, and I loved it, and I probably wanted to fight even more than you did, and was chomping at the bit constantly. But at the end of the day, it was a strategy that worked, and you won, and it was a great race, and I fell back in love with it. And I think, through some other things that happened personally in life, my wife looked at me one day and she said, I don't know why you ever backed out of this. I think that this is exactly what you should be doing.
You're built for this, yeah.
You're built for this, and I think you should go into this full time.
Yeah, and let's pause there, man, because you are built for it. When I talk to people, because you obviously, with this Vote No campaign and everything, a lot of people have asked, who is this guy? And he's a friend of yours. Like, what connection do you have? They're curious. I had a guy say, and he's like a force of nature. Like, this guy doesn't turn off. I'm like, you have no idea. Like, but what has it been that got you to this point to where you're like, okay, I want to do this as a career. Like, I can do this as a career. And what I told people is that what you need to be successful in this line of work, and what I believe, frankly, that the conservative movement looks for is two factors: brains and balls. People are looking for intelligence, the rise of the intellectual right. People are looking for people that can put together a sentence and put together a game plan and speak with conviction. But they're also looking for people that have boldness and toughness. And you are quintessentially both of those things. So this is what you're doing now. Like you're in, whether it's an economic decision or not or a good economic decision or not, like you're here and you care deeply about the conservative movement and what this thing looks like moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, look, politics is a rough business to make a living by. I mean, it oftentimes is very kind of hand to mouth. But you have to enjoy the fight. You have to enjoy putting together and executing on a strategy, and ultimately you have to be motivated by the ideas. By you have to be a true believer, honestly, to stay into. Okay.
So could you work with a candidate that you didn't share political worldview with? Could you work for that? Could you be hired to work a campaign or work for a candidate that you didn't have core first principle ideology with?
No.
You couldn't do it?
No.
You couldn't or you wouldn't?
Both.
Yes.
Both. I mean, look, there are certain people who I consider to be friends, who I disagree with, who I'm willing to not get in their way, or I'm willing to, very marginally on the side kind of help or give advice or something like that. But in terms of like being hired on, running a campaign strategy for, investing myself, I couldn't do it. I found again, it goes back to, you have to understand my family. You have to understand how I was brought up. And my parents aren't political people. They were not like what you would consider to be political people. But they had convictions, and they instilled in me convictions, and my brother and I convictions. And one of them, something that I care very deeply about and try to instill in my own sons, is one is just courage. I think what people lack today is courage. We're looking here. I mean, I see Lincoln and Churchill, and those are my two, fundamental heroes. And both of those men had courage. They had balls. And they didn't care. Definitely Churchill did not care what people thought of him. I think he actually relished playing the villain oftentimes. He made mistakes, and he made some big mistakes, actually, especially early on in his life and his career. And Lincoln certainly made some mistakes, and I think he was a little bit more sensitive to how people thought about him. He was certainly more sensitive to people's feelings. But at the end of the day, they knew what was set before them, and they went after it, and nothing deterred them from it. And even if it meant their own death or the death of other people, they believed in it, and they fought for it, and they were willing to put everything on the line for it. And I admire that. I greatly admire that. And it's something that I hopefully will emulate in my own life, and I'm trying to instill in my own sons to emulate it, because we need courage. I think that is the political virtue, or the virtue that's missing in politics and in leadership now more than anything, is courage. Everybody wants empathy. They want understanding. Look, we've been dealing with that bullshit for a long time. I'm just going to speak straight here. And it's gotten us really nowhere. It's gotten us with a bunch of soft, beta, low-T men and women who don't know how to lead. And we need conviction. We need courage. We need people who are willing to stand up and fight for, if not perhaps even die for, their principles. And even though I would fundamentally disagree with somebody on the left who would do that, I at least have respect for them for their willingness to do it, even though I think that the ideas and the worldview is screwed up.
I've heard you say that. I've heard you say that even though I may have a disagreement, that you admire people that have courage and conviction, are willing to lead out in front and stand out in front and try to fight for things they believe in. Whether you agree or you disagree in the principle, you admire courage.
Absolutely. People who call themselves conservatives or to a lesser extent Republicans, who are weak in the knees, and you and I have had conversations about people who we know we're talking about right now. I have absolutely no respect for those people. Not only do I have respect for them, I think they're dangerous. I think people like that are dangerous, and in a bad way dangerous, because who knows what they're willing to compromise on? Who knows what they're willing to sell out in order to be liked? The need to be liked, the need to be accepted by other people. Like, there's a part of it that's just human nature, right? I mean, we are as independent as we can be as human beings. There is a deep need to survive, to be a part of a community, a tribe, to have dependence and be depended on. That's a part of it. But at the end of the day, I reject the need to want to be liked and accepted by whoever the in crowd is or whatever. I would much rather be respected or perhaps even feared by those people, but not to necessarily be liked if it means I'm going to have to compromise on principles.
Well, we know that about you. I know that about you. I appreciate that about you. You and I have had unique conversations over the last really 3 years about you pushing me in some regards to try to evolve into what the fighter that you think the community needs. It's been helpful to me in many regards. You and I have had conversations between what this community needs, a fighter or a reformer, what the state needs, what the country needs.
Yeah.
So
I think that's, but here's the thing, I think you and I agree on this. I think that's a false dichotomy between fighter and reformer.
I agree.
I think
you've
it's
heard
got to be both.
You've heard the
absolutely,
criticism.
absolutely. And I don't think it's fair. And I think too, we have to also distinguish people's styles. I mean, let's just go back to Churchill and Lincoln, two fundamentally different styles. Anybody who knows anything about Abraham Lincoln will know that he was a quiet, kind of a soft man. I mean, soft in terms of just he was very sensitive. He had experienced an immense amount of grief in his life.
Very good.
He lost two sons and a daughter, very, very early stages of her life. His wife basically had a complete mental and nervous and spiritual breakdown. Of course, he endured the weight of a civil war, and not just for the men on the Union side, but also for the South. He knew that everybody was an American and felt the weight of that. He was very soft and sensitive to that. And in many ways, he found ways to try to accommodate and work with people. Anybody who goes back and reads about Lincoln's life in terms of especially the men and the young boys who deserted the army out of fear, he did not want them to go, to endure a severe punishment. He wanted mercy on them. After the war ended, he wanted mercy on the South. He wanted to rebuild the country, and then of course his life was tragically taken. Churchill had a very different style. His exterior was hard. It was cold. I'm pretty sure he had some form of Asperger's. The man had no empathy for anybody whatsoever. He simply didn't care. He grew up in immense privilege. He did not have the sensitivity. He was not quick to admit fault or mistakes at all. But both men were fighters, and both men honestly led the world, I think, in a really fundamental way at a really crucial time.
That's good, Ben.
And so a fighter comes in different forms and in different styles. I have a very different style than you do. But I think both are necessary. And I think you're in the right position that you're in. I couldn't do what you do. I would turn people off. I could never get elected, for one. But I would turn people off. I probably couldn't get anything done. I don't know. Maybe you would have a political career doing what I do. Maybe not. I don't know. It would be interesting to see. But I think the style, just because the styles are different, doesn't mean that the fight's not there. It can be there. It just may look a little bit different.
Let's talk about fighting. Let's talk about being villainized. Let's talk about, because you kind of relish that role. You don't mind getting out in front and taking the shots.
Yep.
And there's nothing that stirs the nest more than when we start talking about schools and start talking about school bonds. As many people in the Wichita-Sedgwick County community know, we just came through USD 259, the largest school district in the state of Kansas. You got 47,000 kids, a lot of challenges, a lot of needs. We have a superintendent who's a friend of mine, who I do like greatly, that is laying out a vision and laying out a vision for what he thinks is the next generation of USD 259, the trajectory. And you didn't agree with the vision in regards to the buildings piece. No. You disagreed wholeheartedly with the bond, a $450 million bond that you led in front. How did you you're a political strategist.
Yep.
You're a consultant. Yep. You were just in Georgia recently working a presidential campaign and working for a PAC. You've been in Indiana. You've worked small campaigns like county commission races. You've done it all.
Yep.
Ben, you've done it all.
Yep.
But you got out in front on the school bond, and people hire you to run the Vote No campaign. How did it get to the point where you're like, okay, I'll pause politics in that regard. I want to take this on.
So here's what I want to clear up. No one actually hired me. I felt strongly about this from day one back in May or June of last year when they started talking about the potential of having a bond and maybe even putting it on the last November election. And I remember talking to some people then, maybe you and I talked about it, and I said, I want to keep an eye on this thing. This is not a good idea. I do not think this is the right time to try to pass a bond measure. And so I followed it, had a lot of things going on last year politically, come back home, and I had somebody reach out to me to say, I'd like to talk about the bond, but it was never a matter of like, I want to hire you. My intent was always to start a PAC and to try to form a campaign to try to defeat the bond. And then all I did was go out and happen to find some people who were willing to write checks and invest in that PAC. It was not a matter of them signing a contract and them coming to say, hey, we want to hire you to run this.
But why, Ben? Why the bond? Like, why? And listen, man, you and I talk sometimes 5-6 times a day.
Yeah.
We've become very close over the last few years. I know your heart. I know your head. You're a 259 product.
Yep.
You're a public school advocate.
Yep.
But sometimes people are having a hard time reconciling, okay, he says he's a public school advocate, but here is in this bond. He's leading the way. What is it about this bond that you said, I have got to act. I've got to show courage. No matter what people think, I've got to stay out in front of this.
It goes back to first principles. This thing's a tax increase, and they can say it's not all day long and zero rate change and all that BS, and that's exactly what it is. And frankly, I think that was really stupid of their consultants to make their messaging about property taxes. That was a huge mistake. But they did, and so we met them there, and I'm saying, look, this is ridiculous. This is a tax increase. It will be a tax increase, and I'm fundamentally against a tax increase, and I fundamentally reject the idea that we need to continue to take more of people's money to accomplish something of consequence. We don't. And I also looked at 259's budget. I went back to the 2008 bond, and I looked at the claims that they were making about improving education. Are you kidding? I mean, just go look. And there's been all kinds of stuff, and they've accused me of cherry picking and doing all this stuff, and we can go into all that. But at the end of the day, the data is what the data is. Anybody can go look for themselves. You can come to your own conclusions about it. 259 is basically flat. Look, I can respect Kelly, the superintendent, for wanting to have a vision and try to put something together. But I think that the bond, I stand by it to this day, not just because we won. I would have stuck by it even if we lost, that was the wrong thing to lead out with. They should have rethought it. And I think they were operating in bad faith from day one. Why do I say that? Because we're sitting on property that they should have either had sold or that they had very detailed, transparent plans of how they were going to sell it and the market rate that they could get for it to try to recover that money from taxpayers. Just try to say, we want a much smaller number. Not even saying then I would have agreed with it, but I at least would have respected it a lot more. And I think that their future-ready plan, which is to help improve education, that should have been the key focus. And they should not have tried to link their future-ready with the new buildings, saying that, hey, if we get these new learning environments, whatever that is, that this is somehow going to lead to this rapid flourishing of our students. I'll go back to, all you have to do is go back and look at Southeast High School again. And I know that's become kind of a threadbare talking point now, but I'll continue to go back to it. The school's not even 10 years old.
Sure.
And it's indicative of everything that this bond was going to become. It was well over budget, $14 million over budget. The thing was not well thought out or planned at all. They took it 7 miles outside of town, put it into a developing neighborhood. Fair enough, but they kept pulling from the old Southeast neighborhood, not realizing that pulling from the old neighborhood and then getting a new neighborhood development where you're going to have more people moving in is probably going to, double your attendance, which is almost exactly what it did. They only built the school for 2,000 students. From day one, the place was over capacity. I mean, they were doing news stories about violence breaking out there all the time because they were constantly dealing with conflicts. I mean, they had kids on the record telling news stations, maybe it was hyperbole, but they were saying, we're packed in here like sardines. Kids are on the floor of buses riding into school. They had to reconfigure the whole busing system. And it was like, okay, over budget, overcrowded. The test scores after 10 years, and you can even look at them just leading up to COVID, are abysmal. I mean, so we got a brand new building with all the bells and whistles and all the brand new learning environments. Where's the product? Mm-hmm. What do we have to show for any of this? And again, it's to think that, look, I'm a strong believer in public schools. I was not going out saying that we should take 259's annual budget and try to reduce it. I wasn't making any argument like that. What I was saying is, with a budget of almost $1 billion, and all anybody has to do is go back and look, and you can see how much money that they spend on their capital projects, or at least I think they spend on capital projects. And you could see, like, they have money. Where's the money going? And we were constantly getting conflicting answers of what that was. So I'm like, we need more transparency, we need more accountability, and there needs to be a better plan. They gave us talk about zero rate change. They gave us a zero-sum plan. It's all or nothing. It's either this or bust. And I completely reject that. I reject that. You've not given us options. You've not given the neighborhoods and the communities who have either lost or about to lose their elementary school any options. It's just like, well, it doesn't meet the attendance requirement, so therefore it's out of here.
Yeah.
Well, what happens in 10 years if demographics shift and we don't have an attendance requirement for some of these brand new schools? What are we going to do then? Shut them down too? I mean, it seems par for the course from what we've gotten in the past. So, and they have smooth answers for every little question you have. Sure. But if you dig just even an inch below the surface, you'll see that it's a lot of BS. There's nothing to it.
Well, Ben, I think there's a lot of factors at play. I appreciate and everything you're saying. It resonates with people. You won. It was close, but you won, and because it resonates with people. I think the metric that resonates the most with people is, number one, previous experience. Mm-hmm. What did you do with the previous bond? And I think that was from a credit to on your standpoint was the stewardship of the previous bond doesn't merit a new bond. You said it multiple times, and that resonated with people. When I talk to people, it resonated. Now, my kids are not in 259 district. Mm-hmm. They're in May School District, but it resonated with people. The second one was, and it's something I talk about frequently, is people really are hurting because of taxation. Yeah. Property taxation really is hurting people. You have this balance that we have to try to achieve in local government. It's a balance between services, efficient services, and taxation, the cost to provide those services. And when you get out of balance either way, people's lives are impacted. You have bad services, slow EMS response waits. You have nobody at 911 picking up on time. You have a jail that's overcrowded and underfunded and understaffed. I mean, on and on and on and on. If you have bad services, that's not good for the community. People's lives are impacted.
Of course.
Vice versa. If you have high taxation, it also impacts people's lives. And I think where people are at right now is they measure that seesaw, as they measure where are we at in this equilibrium, that people feel like we're out of equilibrium. They feel like the cost is impacting their lives. So any tax increase that comes from it, no matter what it's for, you're going to have a block of people that says we can't endure it.
Yeah.
Is that what you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at the end of the day, and I've heard the superintendent say this now a couple times, we just can't run these school buildings without the bond. I'm sorry. A bond is a tool. In many cases, it's a useful and necessary tool to getting certain projects done. And there's a reason you have it. And I've said from day one, I'm not categorically against a bond. They can be wonderful tools. But what he's talking about is creating a permanent line item on our property tax statements just for buildings. That's going to be a check that just continues to grow and grow and grow. And I think what really troubled me is how much the Yes campaign either deflected or minimized the tax increase and what the tax savings would be. I mean, they were so tone deaf. I mean, these are people who I would assume most of whom are making well over $100,000 a year. And they were minimizing a tax decrease when I was hearing from plenty of people on fixed incomes and seniors saying, like, we can't take any more of this. We can't take any more of this.
I understand that.
And it was a real problem. And I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. I don't mind if I get myself in trouble, but I'm going to call out a name. I mean, there was a video that just came out today from Todd Ramsey. And he was going on about the no vote and how, we won and how we need to make investments. And it was criticizing, local elected leaders like yourself for not taking a firmer stance on the Yes campaign, and that, we tout the affordability of a place like Wichita or Sedgwick County, but there's a lot more to it than that. And we need forward thinking and all of these types of things. Here's what gets me about that. Why is it that somehow the forward thinking and the progressive and all the culture and everything is always on the backs of government and taxpayers to do it? I mean, government doesn't create the culture. They're not going to create all this stuff. And to think that we're going to sign up for investment, and the investment is always with taxpayer dollars. That's always this massive investment. It was never about the investment. It's about how the investment so far has been managed. And any other company, when they make investment, there is transparency, at least, internally, there's accountability, because the funds are not unlimited. You're going to have to build it off your profit, or you're going to have to take added risk to take out a loan for more capital or take on more investors. You're in business. You know how this works. Mm-hmm. And so is the juice worth the squeeze? And if we're going to do it, we want to make sure we do it right and execute, and we get the results we need for it. Otherwise, we've blown it. Sure. I mean, we could risk our whole business. I understand 259 government is not, it's not for profit, but in many ways it's almost worse because it's a guaranteed profit. There's no guaranteed profit for business. It's guaranteed profit for government because you have essentially the power of the sword to come and collect taxes. You have the power to come and take my home if I don't pay my property taxes. I mean, I don't have an option to not pay property tax into 259. And I, as a taxpayer, and several thousand others across this city, said it's not about not investing in kids. We want strong schools. It's about what have you done with the money and what do we have to show for it? Look, yeah, we're investors. We're investors in this. And as an investor, as a shareholder, I have a right to know what you're doing with my money and where's my return on investment. That's what you miss about this, Todd. I don't think you know how investment works because where's the return? And to just continue to say, well, we're going to invest and we don't get any return. There's no accountability. There's no transparency. And we're just going to continue to up the ante and basically either shame or guilt people into doing it, saying how they're somehow, not wanting to invest in kids or don't like public education. I mean, that's don't even take that seriously. That's not a serious argument. That's not an argument at all. It's just a tired bromide that they're throwing out. And I'm tired of that. And I think a lot of people are tired of that. And if they think, anybody who watches The Office will understand this analogy with Michael Scott.
Oh boy.
When they say, when they come back and he says, I love the paper business. And if they would have shut me down when he tries to start his own paper business, I would have started another one the next day and another one the next day. Look, and this may annoy a lot of people. If you think that I'm going away, or if I would have lost this vote, that somehow I'm going away or I'm backing off of any of this thing, I will be Michael Scott till I'm dead. You take it away, I'm going to come back the next day. I'm coming back the next day because I genuinely believe that this is the right thing, not just for myself, for my family, but for your family, for the city of Wichita, for the country. And I'm going to continue to fight for this. And I'm not going to stop. Winning or losing an election, name, insults, whatever the case may be, I'm not going to stop.
Well, it was certainly contentious in many regards. I appreciate that those that were in the front of this, when you were in the room, you were having your debates, it was very cordial.
Yeah.
But it was about principles on both sides. There has to be, let me ask this question. Is there a different plan that would work? Here's what we know in 259. 80% of the kids live under the poverty level. We do have older buildings. There is a big budget. Teachers need attention. Teachers need resources. The bond wasn't going to help teachers with income or anything of that sort or a stipend of sort. That wasn't what a bond does or could do. Mm-hmm. What's the path forward, man? What is the path forward? Because I think today many people are saying, okay, now what? Now what? You say this isn't it. Do you have any ideas of what could be it? Where do we go with 259 public education in Wichita?
I think the thing that's a little worrying to me is that and I think it's probably because they've invested so much time and money in it. The facilities master plan is the master plan. Mr. Bielefeld has said that even today, even though they're not conceding that they lost, but this is going to happen. It's just going to take longer because we don't have the bond funds. I don't know what the alternative to the master plan is, but I know this. It doesn't seem like we've explored every single option that's been available to us. I've never once said that there's not going to be maintenance. Anybody who owns a piece of property knows there's going to be maintenance. Sure. And especially if there's older buildings. I reject the whole thing that they're older buildings. Look, most of the homes in Wichita are over 60 years old. Does that mean we're just going to go rip them all down or whatever? No, you have to maintain them. Yeah, there's going to be that. I think the question always came down to, why are things being allowed to go into such disrepair? When you have the money, how are decisions being made? Those types of things. In terms of the schools and the consolidation, again, it was never that there maybe won't need to be some consolidations, but what is the metric for consolidation just because the attendance happens to be a little bit lower? In the case of the 4 schools, elementary schools that they announced are going to close, they never told us what the max capacity of those schools are. Is there a possibility that maybe maybe you can consolidate 2 of those schools into the other schools, maybe close down 1 school and go to 3 or something? It seems like there are other options.
Do you think there are other options? Well,
I think there are other options.
The conversation isn't going away. Maybe the bond is going away, but the conversation isn't. The bond failed for a lot of different reasons. You detailed a lot of those reasons. Ben, I think it's actually indicative of a larger conversation of, what people can endure in this community right now in regards to taxation. What role does government have in the lives? Now, I'm taking it from the school bond over to county government, city government, state government, and the federal government. Like, what role and what worldview is going to win out in this? And what is the byproduct of that for our communities? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about conservatism. When you and I talk about this, I would say 80% of the conversations you and I have are about what are we seeing on the ground in regard to conservatism, republicanism. What does this mean? What are the first principles? What's the impact of this MAGA movement and Trump? And where do we go after this? Like, give me your thought process of where is conservatism today? Where are we going? The influence of Trump. Like, what does this look like, and how do we maneuver in today's environment?
Well, what I'll say off the bat is conservatism is ultimately about actually knowing that there's something to conserve. There's something to actually preserve. And if not, at least slowing this, what we might call this idea of progress. And I think that there are some foundational issues to conservatism that maybe people who would call themselves conservatives need to be reminded of. A, that there's something to conserve. B, that we take human nature really seriously. And what I mean by that is we think that there are certain fundamental truths about human nature that are unchanging, and that something to do with historical evolution or culture or whatever, maybe on the margins might change some things, but at the core, humans stay the same. I mean, it was interesting, not to go back all the way to the bond, but it was interesting to hear sometimes they were talking about we need these new schools because students just learn in a fundamentally different way. At the end of the day, I mean, not to get too philosophical, but that's an anthropological claim. And you're just saying it. You're not backing it up with anything. I don't see any evidence to suggest that humans are fundamentally learning in a completely different way now than what they did 20 years ago, 50 years ago. So there are certain core things that are just not going to change.
Well, has conservatism changed? I mean, if you think about the Goldwater conservatism, if you think about the National Review conservatism, if you think about people that you and I have both read historically, if you think about the rise of fusionism and the role of libertarianism in the conservative movement, if you think about the Reagan era and the Reagan conservatism, all the way up to the compassionate conservatism that George W. Bush talked about. And then today, and who's leading the conservative movement? Is Trump the leader in the conservative movement? What does this look like? Where are we going wrong? Like, I think a lot of people have questions today about the political environment and what this looks like. But I think there are those that care deeply about the conservative movement. Old school conservatism, and are asking questions about, okay, what are our principles? Are they the same? Have they changed? Where are we going in this movement?
Donald Trump is not an ideological conservative, but he is what you might call an impulsive conservative. So his impulses, I think, are bending towards a conservative. They have a conservative bent towards them,
or at least a right bend.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he could be a little bit more on the pragmatic side than many conservatives like myself, but that's not inherently a bad thing. He's not an ideological guy. He's more of a practical guy, but his impulses are to be on the right or conservative. Look, in terms of the you mentioned fusionism, I think what was very interesting about this is that conservatism seemed to be a little bit in a wandering space for a while, because fusionism came out of the Buckley conservatives who were pulling in the anti-communists,
Frank Myers, all of this group,
the more cultural conservatives like the Phyllis Schlafly's and others, the Father Richard John Newhouse, the libertarians, and he was trying to fuse them and merge them all together. But the common enemy was the Soviet Union, communism, and then ultimately this big morphing big government. And I think also just this idea that we are moving inexorably towards something called progress, which nobody could define what the end of that was. I mean, Bill Buckley, when he the first editorial National Review, he's like, we stand to thwart history yelling stop. And I think I've told you this before. There's nothing fashionable or sexy about conservatism. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Conservative is the most boring thing on the face of the planet. There's nothing attractive about it. But at the end of the day, I think it's fundamentally true. And so that's why you have conservatives. Whereas the more progressive or liberal side, it's always new, it's always flashy, there's always something sexy and appealing about it that appeals to people in human nature. But at the end of the day, those ideas run out of steam and they're proven to be false time and time again. So, which is why, going back to Churchill, you tend to be more liberal when you're younger, more conservative when you're older. I think that's being messed up a little bit now in today's categories. But I think as a general rule, I can see some truth to it. But we were in a wondering space after the fall of the Soviet Union, and we're kind of like, well, here's Bill Clinton, who in many ways, Bill Clinton could pass as a conservative today as it's being defined as today's Republican Party. Many of the ideas are there because he adopted a lot of them, and free market stuff and all this. And then we had George W. Bush, and it was just this really weird time. Now, I think with Trump, we see this really kind of emerging fusionism where you've got...
I agree 100%.
You've got big labor now, which is there. I mean, the opening night of the RNC at the head of the Teamsters.
Here's what you also have, and I think it was the Washington Post or Washington Times, maybe it was the New York Times recently came out with an article talking about how Trump had appeal with young men.
Oh, yeah.
And trying to understand why young men who may not be socially conservative or even fiscally conservative, but they were MAGA voters, they were Trump voters, and trying to understand what that is and why. And here's what I witness and hear when I talk to younger people. This generation of younger people, many of them were a COVID generation who saw what government overreach looked like.
Yep.
They felt it. They were locked out of their schools, the masking situations, the shutdown of the world and the world economy. Like they saw that, and many of these young men, particularly, were like, "That's too much. We don't jive with this. We don't agree with this. We may not agree with the social conservatism, but we certainly don't agree with overreach from government." And they come from this more libertarian worldview, but they don't have a home in a political party. And these people have become Trump voters, these young men in particular. And what they appreciate about Trump, right or wrong, what they appreciate is toughness.
Yep.
And when they look at one party and one leader of a party, they see toughness. When they look at another party and other leaders, they don't see toughness. And that's what, when I listen, when I'm just not injecting my opinion, when I'm just listening to young men in particular, that's what I hear. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Well, what I was going to say is what bound fusionism, Buckley's conservative, kind of coalition, was the common enemy of the USSR. And I think one of the reasons why conservatives were in this hinterland for a while is because we didn't have the common enemy. The advent of what you might call wokeism or woke culture is now the enemy. And this, it's infiltration. And now you see this new fusionism. Whether it's, organized labor, which I still have a lot of suspicions of.
I know you do.
But it's a sense of, organized labor. You've got these young men who aren't necessarily, definitely not ideological conservatives, but they gravitate more towards the MAGA brand and what they think of that, the Joe Rogan types, that kind of thing. And then you have just, good old-fashioned traditional conservatives like myself and lots of other people in between. But the common enemy seems to be this wokeism and the species of the wokeism.
So, Ben, is this seasonal, or what is this good for the conservative movement, for those that are ideologically conservative?
I think it's been great.
You think it's good?
I think it's great because if you go back and you look at the beginning of National Review or even before National Review, and then you look at Buckley, I mean, a lot of these people kind of came in on the margins for whatever reason.
Yes, that's true.
But then ended up being folded into the movement. And as their worldview, and that was why National Review is so impactful, not just for the movement, but for the country, because it was the defining place for ideas. And I do think that that's the one thing that today's conservatives are lacking. We don't have, Donald Trump has left an indelible mark on the Republican Party.
It's undeniable, yes.
And I think, honestly, for the better in many ways. But what we don't have a Buckley. Now, I will say that I think J.D. Vance, could potentially fill a role like that. But Bill Buckley was also just very
unique.
unique.
Buckley, you're talking about the borders. You're talking about someone that can be the governor, and not the governor in the position, but the governor is the regulator of what conservatism looks like. You're talking about someone who sets the guidelines and the guardrails. Is that what you're talking about?
He was the kind of intellectual wellspring, and National Review was, and it set the tone, and it brought together. You got to see the fusionism being worked out because they were debating it all the time within the pages of National Review. And I still subscribe and read National Review to this day, but it's a totally different magazine than when Bill Buckley ran
we got a
that.
few more minutes. Let's get to this point here. What happens after Trump? What does the conservative movement look like after Trump? What does it look like? Where are the principles? Do we have specified first principles that are going to carry the conservative movement to more of to flourishing and prosperity, or is this going to change into something? Is this a season, or is this a permanent reshuffling of republicanism and the conservative movement?
Well, I think it's in part too soon to tell in terms of just the seasonality of it. I do think that the Republican Party fundamentally has changed, and I don't see it going back. I mean, if you look at, I actually mark this down. The 2008 election was the beginning of the change of the parties, and the marker for that was when Barack Obama rejected the public financing of campaigns. That's how I mark it.
It changed.
Because he said, originally he was all signed up for it. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And John McCain, it was kind of too late and he'd already signed up for it. And so, but then Obama went and raised all this money. And it was the beginning of a change because you saw a flip in corporate America. And now if you look at today's Democrat Party, as much as they're trying to recapture a lot of that, and you still have some hangover because people who are just like me, I've been a Reagan conservative my whole life. Some people who've just been Democrats their whole life are going to continue to be that way. But the party is changing, and it is very much the party of corporate America. And the Republican Party, at least from this last election, you could see, it was a lot of people who were just working class.
Yeah.
I was down in Georgia working for Musk's America PAC, and one of the most effective ads, and they had polling that showed this, and it was wildly effective, where Donald Trump had this ad that said, Kamala Harris is for they, them. I'm Donald Trump. I'm for you. And it was this thing because it showed, this whole wokeism, ideological, just craziness. And then it showed Donald Trump embracing these kind of labor union guys who were just sit there trying to provide for their families. And it's like, this is the fundamental shift of these parties. And I think I don't think that that's going to change anytime. Yeah. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Now, I think there may be aspects of it that may be just seasonal, but it's too soon to tell what those are. And it'll be interesting to see. I tell all my candidates, even local candidates now, you're going to have to define yourself with MAGA and Donald Trump. Whether you're how much you are, how little you are, he is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It absolutely is because it's going to happen, and the media is going to force that on you. The people who you're running races and primaries, especially, are going to force that on you. We saw this happen with Stephanie Wise's race.
Yeah. Last question.
Yeah.
How do Christians navigate this? You're a person of faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a person of faith. I talk a lot about trying to lead with my identity as a Christian, not my identity as a conservative, identity as a Republican, that first and foremost for me are the principles of being a Christ follower. Mm-hmm. How do we handle this in this season? How do we navigate this season, and how do we continue to be an effective witness in our community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any great profound answers other than I think it's a matter of staying vigilant in prayer and constantly evaluating yourself and how well you're loving your neighbor, even your political neighbor who you disagree with. And I'm saying this because I have to remind myself of it all the time. And I think that's part of if you do have the fight in you, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And to make sure that it's not a nail, it's a person. And this is somebody who bears the image of the triune God.
That's it.
And seeing that and not allowing yourself to get so swept up in your definition of who this person is because they're a political opponent or whatever, or if they're a political ally and you can can think that they're now better than everybody else or whatever, that you allow yourself to basically forsake that. But yeah, it's a day-to-day thing. It's a constant tension that I feel myself living in very imperfectly. I'm probably way more, political than I need to be on certain things and not bearing much of a Christian witness. But I also think, too, that Christians need to be taking a posture of obviously loving our neighbors and all of this. But I also think that we should not be allowing our enemies to define what Christianity is and isn't.
Agreed.
And I think that there's a tendency to want to do that because it's easy for them to say, well, I took this verse out of context and this is what Jesus is and I'm measuring you against it and you're not living up to that or your view of immigration isn't up to that. And I think to constantly be evaluating and going back to the scriptures ourselves, and I think this is where the prayer thing is also very important, and then not allowing our enemies to decide or define what Christianity is and then us get kind of captured and swept away in that.
Yeah. It's interesting times, man. I appreciate my relationship with you. I appreciate your insight. You always, like I said, we talk many times a day. Mm-hmm. We bounce a lot of ideas. There are times, many times we agree. There's times we don't agree on things. Mm-hmm. But we do so in a way to where it's always insightful to get your opinion because it comes with a lot of background in regards to the first principles of what conservatism looks like. I always enjoy also talking not just on the national level and national politics, but on the local level and sharing things that are happening locally and the opportunities we have and how conservatism plays in that. Listen, I'm a localist, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a federalist. I want to push decisions down to the local level to where we can have a coffee together. The people that are making decisions that impact your life, you have access to. And we talk frequently about the opportunities of what conservatism looks like, not just in regards to fragility, but in regards to the capacity to reform and what it looks like to modernize, and that the intellectual right should be the ones saying, hey, listen, there's a pivot opportunity here to gain efficiencies, gain cost savings. And that's what we can do here on the local level. So you and I talk about those things frequently. That's likely another podcast and another discussion with a lot of different people. But what I appreciate about you is the fight.
Yeah.
What I appreciate about you is the courage. What I appreciate about you is the conviction.
Thanks.
It's always been fun. A lot of different races to come.
Yeah.
You think we'll have a few races together maybe in the future?
I think we will. May take a little bit more coaxing on my end, but yeah, I think we definitely can.
There might be one day.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we got a lot of work to do here locally. And
we do.
I'm happy to be in that fight. So, brother,
likewise.
God
Thank
bless
you so
man.
much.
Appreciate
Absolutely.
you.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. Thank you.